Hey everybody, this is Anita from Albuquerque, and I live here in Albuquerque, New Mexico with my husband, Kenneth, and two feisty cats and 500,000 bees that I tend. I wish I could be there in person with you. I realize that there's a synergy and an energy that is created when communities gather together in person. But I realize we still are the body of Christ, even though we are not together in real time, but virtual time, and that there are opportunities, I guess I would say, that this time can bring to us, and that is why your leaders entitled it Soul Tending, Pandemic as Portal. A portal is a passageway. It's going from one thing to another, a threshold, if you will, as I explained in my first video, that we are indeed in that time between one world and the next, what is coming after this pandemic. And it's a perfect time to keep Sabbath and to become more awake and aware to what Sabbath can be in our lives. So I want to, even though I can't be there in person, and I really would love to meet you all at some point in time, I want to tell you my story, a little bit of why I found Sabbath to be important in my life as a congregational minister and as an ordinary person. Why I think it is really critical that we use this time wisely, this time of pandemic. If you're not on the front lines, or even if you are on the front lines, you probably need Sabbath more than ever. But if you are sheltered at home or quarantined or feel like you are in lockdown, this is the time to become more aware of what I think Sabbath is, which is to be more present to your life, to become more conscious of what's important, what has meaning, what has purpose for your life, and how you might want to live your life differently when we move to something more normal. What is normal, after all? We don't know what normal will look like after this time. But it is a time where we can incubate a new way of being, is what I would say. So I am a Wayne County girl. As I said in my first introductory tape, I grew up on a farm in Wayne County, Kidron, Ohio. My father and his father and my great-grandfather were farmers. And so I grew up as a farmer's daughter for most of my life. My parents, however, did take jobs off the farm to supplement our income from time to time. But one thing that I really associate Sabbath with is the land, the earth, being close to the creatures. And so one of my particular chapters in my book called Sabbath as Soul Tending, and I'm trying to find it here, Sabbath Soul Tending Journey into the Heart of Sabbath, is that it was deeply associated with nature as a Sabbath companion. And that chapter in my book talks about how that was so important to me. It was a place of solace for me. It was a place of peace for me. Some of you might know Wendell Berry's wonderful poem called The Peace of Wild Things. Like when the despair of the world grows in me and I worry about the lives of myself and my children, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty, and I come into the peace of wild things. That for me was Sabbath, when I could be out in the beautiful creation. Because what it did was, for a child who is often confused by perhaps human dynamics or the struggle of what it was to make a living on a farm. My parents struggled sometimes to survive. The complexity of family dynamics. Going out into the natural world was a place where I could find time away, respite. And I would come into a slower heartbeat. My heart rate, could rest and grow into a slower rhythm. I feel that's one of the things our overly scheduled children really don't know another way. And, many children who grow up in cities or far away from the peace of wild things don't know that slow heartbeat of the natural world, which brings us to and trains us in that rhythm so that we can learn what it means to calm down, to de-stress in a way that is not usually what our distracted, busy, crazy lives call us to. So the slow heartbeat of creation, where nature is so generous in her reciprocity, she gives us of herself in order that we might have the gift of healing, of the restoration of shalom. Shalom, it literally means wholeness, and the natural world can be that place. I wish I could be with you on your farm, Bellwether Farm, or the retreat center, because that is a place that you can go and find rest and respite with your children, with your family, for yourself. And I hope you find that. For Sabbath keeping, one of the things is that it brings us into present time. We're often human doings instead of human beings. And Sabbath, the call, the invitation of ceasing our work, which is really what Shabbat or Sabbath means, is to cease your labor. Remember, that's what God did in the very first chapter of Genesis, where after this big creation building project, Yahweh sat back and said, I'm done, I'm finished, I'm taking a rest, I'm taking a day off. The point was, and it became a commandment, right? The fourth commandment in the 10 Commandments was that do this so that you don't just see yourself as a human doing, and that you don't become you have this exaggerated sense of self-importance, that what you are doing is is more important than just being loved by the creator of this creation, the one who wants to be with you and invite you to be free of the burdens of your life for a time. So what makes your heart sing? That is when I think of nature as Sabbath companion, where in the natural world, where in your community, where in your place where you live, your place, your space, do you find that wonderful sense of joy and affection and affinity, where you can just rest and relax? Wendell Berry also talks about it all turns on affection. Wendell Berry is one of my absolute favorites, and I think I heard that someone else quoted Wendell Berry, one of your other speakers this weekend. But in a Jefferson lecture, he writes an essay called "It All Turns on Affection." Where are the places that we have a deep affection or affinity for in our place where we live? It's based on the book Howard's End by E.M. Forster. But in it, Berry talks about boomers and stickers. Boomers come to a place and they want to exploit it for profit. They want to come in and make a killing on Main Street and then take it and go. Take what they can get. They're advantage takers and manipulative, but stickers, like his father, are the ones who come and they stay, they settle. They learn to love the place where they live, the land and the people and everything about it. And they will stay a lifetime to learn the beauty of these places of affection. So in this time, this weekend, after I speak today, you're going to be invited to take a nap or take a contemplative walk. I invite you to go to one of your favorite places where you have a deep affection or affinity, and go observe it. Have a second glance. Richard Rohr, the Franciscan who co-founded the Center for Action and Contemplation, talks about respect. We often think of respect as a human quality for the human world, but respect for the natural world, he said, to respect is to see again, respect, spectacle, to see something with new eyes. Respect, respeculate, respectacle. Sit with that monarch butterfly. Observe it. Respect it. Take a second glance. It's at its beauty, its glory. Sit by that river and learn what you can from that river or that beautiful flowering tree. You might be the only one who ever says hello to that flowering tree or that little tiny violet and says thank you to that violet. So go to those places and feel loved, feel beloved, and offer your love to these places that you can foster affection for. So I grew up on a farm, and Sabbath for me was being out on that farm, not just being inside the four walls of church, even though we always started Sabbath Sunday with church. I write in my second chapter, What Makes Your Heart Sing, I say, the small Mennonite community and the community of my girlhood was the religious and social hub of the town. It formed and shaped me, scripture, community, service. It was a foundational institution for entraining within me the godly message, the stories of Jesus, of collective and personal spiritual practice, of civic responsibility. As a spiritually sensitive child, I loved the church. It was an oasis amidst the confusion of childhood. There were seasons, programs, people. They steadied and enriched my small life in music, worship, Sunday school, youth outings. I talked about how in those summer Sundays of my youth, the stained glass windows of that tiny country church were thrown open to the morning smells and sounds, and I could smell the dewy breezes coming in from the fields. I could hear the meadowlarks and the birds chirping and singing. And I could connect to that outdoor world even as the incredible music of Bach poured forth from the pipe organ and connected those two worlds for me. So I was always eager, even as I was longing and yearning to be outside and free. Even as I loved the church, I also loved to leave that Sunday morning and go play all afternoon, which is what we children did. My parents were working class people. My mother was a nurse, my father a farmer, and eventually other jobs in the community. But we were manual laborers, right? We were weeding gardens, planting gardens, tending our animals during the week, canning, doing all those things. But on Sunday, my parents pulled the plug and they took a nap, and the kids, we would go play. No weeding the garden. We could play with our animals. We could build tree houses. We could race our go-karts up and down the lane, ride our bicycles. But for us, Sunday was about unplugging from manual labor. And so when I went off to school, and you have to understand, my first career was social work. I went to Richmond, Virginia, where I got my social work degree and lived there. Practiced social work for many years until I was called to the seminary. I went to a small Anabaptist seminary in northern Indiana. You often find Mennonites in cornfields because we were a rural farmer folk people when we originally settled here. But I ended up following my dreams to the West Coast because I was also fascinated and curious about art and culture and different people and diversity. And so I ended up finishing at the Graduate Theological Union. And part of what happened there was that I changed classes unbeknownst to me. I became a white-collar girl or a young woman who was going to become a minister. And that was quite amazing to me, that I would no longer have to do manual labor, work with my hands to make a living, as my parents worked very hard, So my first, when I left seminary, I went to Albuquerque, which is where I live now with my husband, Kenneth, and my 2 feisty cats and 500,000 bees. But it was in the work of the church, which I loved. I really felt like was cut out for the work of preaching, teaching, counseling here in this small congregation. But one thing that over time, I realized that I was out of balance. I think when I hit 50 years old, I hit the wall and kind of slid down. It was burnout in a major way for me. Because as a congregational minister, I spent most of my time, with ideas, theology, reading, writing, talking with people, the human world. That was my world. Little did I know that I was longing, my heart and my whole body were longing to be reconnected with the natural world. That was my first home, my first Sabbath home, and I so needed a Sabbath. I needed a sabbatical, which I actually asked for and got at that time. And so what happened was I was able to go off and visit Scotland and Ireland and the Isle of Iona, which was really quite a remarkable experience because I ran into Celtic theology. And as I followed around the saints, the female saints of Ireland, the Well of St. Bridget, there are all these wonderful places dedicated to them out in the created world. St. Gobnet, who was the patron saint of bees, she was a healer, and her statue had bees all over it. And then I got on a ferry and I went across the water over to the Isle of Iona, and I entered a thin place between heaven and earth, the threshold betwixt here and there. I realized on the Isle of Iona how the earth liturgy was deeply woven into the human liturgy over centuries. That the creation and the creator of all of this was not indivisible from religious life and from worship life. It was all one, a seamless whole. I loved that. I learned about the big book of creation and the little book of the Bible. And that didn't mean that the Bible that was a pejorative idea. It was just that the creation was the first revelation of God, right? And the Bible, the human story, came later, right? In the beginning, God created the earth. And after God had a big creation building project, Yahweh sat back and kicked up his heels and said, I'm done. I'm going to rest for a while. And so Sabbath keeping became actually part of the 10 Commandments. Remember the fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. But creation was deeply embedded for me in Sabbath and Sabbath keeping from my childhood all the way. And I didn't realize how critical it was until I went to Iona and Scotland and Ireland and saw how deeply embedded it was in their experience of God. So I came back and I realized, okay, to have a balanced life, I need to have my fingers in the dirt, in the soil. To experience Sabbath and keep it holy, I need to practice Sabbath by being with the natural world. Nature is my companion. And I realized that because people often ask me, can I garden on Sabbath? I'm like, heck yeah, garden on Sabbath. I keep bees on Sabbath because for me, going into the hive is the way I can be contemplative, deeply focused and present. And that's what Sabbath really is. To not just be a human doing, but a human being, is that you are present to what is right in front of you, right? The ordinary gifts of our lives. We cannot know them unless we slow down and come to a place that we really see what's in front of us. That what defines our life, what gives us meaning and purpose, is usually right in front of us, and it flows by us if we are not paying attention. So for me, Sabbath keeping, beekeeping on Sabbath was part of the way I began to rebalance myself. I started keeping bees when I was 50 years old. I apprenticed myself to the bees. I became fascinated by the honeybee. I went to every meeting that the New Mexico Beekeepers Association offered, and I asked beekeepers if I could come and work with them in their bee yards until I could get my own beehive. And what I noticed is that the bees became my teachers. These little invertebrates, and I talk about this in the book, became my Sabbath companions and my teachers. They showed me when I was off. When I was, if I came to the hive and I was agitated, confused, angry, and my energy was not slow, if I didn't practice what the bees needed for me to come into their inner sanctum, their own intimate spaces of their home, send them a few smoke signals so they know I'm coming, slowly move into their hive, be respectful, take a second look at what I see in front of me. Not squish them, which happens when you're too hurried in the hive. Not drop my hive tool on them or, create damage. They will welcome me, and they wouldn't come after me and sting me, which I've certainly had that happen. So respecting the bees, coming to them with my heart open and being truly present, I realized this is Sabbath. The bees teach me. So Sabbath is about showing up to our lives, facing the restlessness, setting that aside. I think our children would really benefit from us keeping Sabbath as adults and for them keeping Sabbath. Children today are so rigidly overscheduled. They don't even know what it is to jump on their bikes and play all afternoon outside or in their backyards. Children have become divorced from the natural world, which is where the slow heartbeat can entrain them to a different way of being, to a way of grounding them, a place of solace and peace and rest. So I think In ending, I want to read something from Wendell Berry because he so well, I think, captures what it means to be present to our lives, which is really what ceasing our work and showing up every seventh day is about. This rhythm of every 7 days, stop. Don't have an exaggerated sense of importance about your life. Realize that most of all, God just wants you to come home to your heart's joy and desire, where you can be loved and filled up with a new way of seeing and of being, which is what the gift of this pandemic is, right? New ways of seeing and being. And if we go deeper into that by practicing Sabbath in a conscious, awake way, our lives can be changed anew when we are on the other side of COVID-19, what that looks like. But here's what Wendell Berry says. He's ruminating about heaven. What will heaven be like? What do I want it to be like? What will heaven look like? He says, I long for the heaven of creatures, of seasons, of day and night. Heaven enough for me would be this world as I know it, redeemed of our abuse of it and one another. It would be the heaven of knowing again. There is no marrying in heaven, and I submit. Even so, I would like to know my wife again, both of us young again. And I remember how I always loved her, even when she was old. I would like to know my children again, all my family, all my dear ones, to see, to hear, to hold more carefully than before, to study them lingeringly as one studies old verses, committing them to heart forever. I would like to know again my friends, my old companions, men and women, horses and dogs, in all the ages of our lives, here in this place that I have watched over all my life in all its moods and seasons. Never enough. I will be leaving how many beauties overlooked, and a painful heaven that would be, for I would know by it how far I have fallen short. I have not paid enough attention. I have not been grateful enough. And yet this pain would be the measure of my love. This pain would be the measure of my love. In eternity's once and now, pain would place me surely in the heaven of my earthly love. Pain would place me surely in the heaven of my earthly love. And so I invite you, in this place, this earthly place that you live, the place where you have affection, go out and find those places and respect them, be with them, take a second look. Find the beauty and the grandeur in your ordinary days. Everything is holy now. May you enjoy the song, Everything is Holy Now, that I am going to ask Nathaniel to post. And come back and we will talk about Sabbath as a place of healing and of wholeness and shalom.